So the issue of the week this past week has been the statements on Twitter and an executive order by Donald Trump, the President of the United States, where he said terrible things are happening in South Africa. South Africa is committing atrocities against white Afrikaners because the government is taking away their land, etc., etc. You know the story, so I'm not going to repeat it. There was also a tweet by their Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Secretary of State is a foreign affairs minister. In the US, they call them Secretary of State, where he also said that he is not going to come to South Africa for the G20 foreign ministers meeting because of the same reasons. We are racially discriminatory, etc., etc. So I thought maybe let me make this video because there's a couple of strands of argument that we need to make about this issue so that we do not lose our way and get distracted and fall into the same cesspit of insults and shouting and divisions that we have seen happening in the United States over the years, especially since Donald Trump entered the political scene. So I think the most important thing to state out front is that obviously the position of the Trump administration is false. There are no land grabs in South Africa. There is no racial discrimination against white South Africans, against Afrikaners, South Africans, and so on. And therefore we need to reject it in its fullest extent, that it is not true, it is a lie. Just as many other positions of the Trump administration, this one and the first one have taken over the years, where they create a problem that does not exist, they elevate it in public discussion, they get everybody worked up and preoccupied with it, and basically flood the zone with controversy and so on, but controversy that is meant to distract completely. And therefore I want to say it is important that we are not distracted by lies. But the other thing I want us to be watchful of is the intention of some of these campaigns, because at the core of it is not just distraction, but it is also division, sowing societal divisions so that South Africans or residents of another country cannot ever find consensus. In other words, it becomes impossible to make a very good argument and convince lots of people that it is true, and therefore they go with it, because that's how democracy is supposed to work. And so misinformation and disinformation, as we see coming from Trump, as we see on social media perpetrated by Elon Musk and other peddlers of misinformation, is designed primarily to make sure that there are such divisions in society that democratic consensus is not possible. It doesn't happen anymore. And we must be very careful of that kind of thing happening in South Africa, because it can and it will happen. One of the pleasing things about this controversy, at least from my perspective, has been to see so many South Africans, black and white, coming together, rejecting the lie, rejecting the position of the Trump administration, and calling AfriForum to account for having lied so often and for so long, claiming that there's white genocide in South Africa, and telling them to take responsibility for the situation that they have helped to create, where there are major implications for the livelihoods of South Africans because of a lie that they've perpetrated. And their righteous indignation and trying to pivot and say no, they asking the US government to target ANC leaders does not wash. We have a democracy in South Africa. Nobody puts a gun to anybody's head to say they must vote for the ANC or any political party. All of us go to the polls and we vote for the political party of our choice. In this last election, the people decided that no party is going to get a majority because they voted for different parties. That is a democracy. And we must protect our democratic space. That means we have to fight disinformation and misinformation with all we have. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to have democratic consensus or have a democracy at all. Because the very theory of democracy is that the facts are the same, the opinions out of those facts are different. What we are seeing now is that the facts don't exist, because a fact is anything, anybody who's got a microphone and a tweet or a smartphone says, and lots of people are going to agree with it and go with it and take positions based on it and so on. And you can't govern or have a democracy based on no facts at all, because we all have to live in the same reality. So the point about democracy is really important. But there's a third point I want to make about this issue, and that is it's important that we remain focused. The Trump administration targeted Canada, targeted Mexico with tariffs. They are part of a free trade agreement between the three of them that Donald Trump negotiated and signed off on in his first administration. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. Canada has been one of the United States' closest allies, sending troops all over the show, including Afghanistan, to support the Americans. And they did not escape this kind of tendency by Donald Trump. That means South Africa is no different. It may happen to us. Now, we can spend a lot of time arguing and insulting each other and insulting Donald Trump and so on social media, or we can try and understand what the implication of a hostile US policy towards South Africa is. The relationships between the United States and South Africa are deep. They go back decades. And it's not just trade, which is enormous. The United States is one of our biggest single trading partners. So it's not just trade, it's cultural ties. South Africans go to the US to study in US universities. They go there for cultural reasons to perform in the United States. They become celebrities over there. DJ Black Coffee, Trevor Noah, Ladysmith Black Mambazo. I can go on and on and on about South Africans through the cultural exchange between the two countries have become successful in the US. Plus, it's an English-speaking country. We watch their movies, they watch our films, music, and so on. So the ties between South Africa and the United States are deep. My philosophy is this, that diplomacy or diplomatic relations are there to deepen relationships between peoples. Governments in a democracy come and go. We cannot be hostile, have hostility between the two peoples simply because there is a government for a few years that is unfriendly towards the government of another country. So what I'm trying to say is we must try as far as possible to maintain relationships with our friends in the United States. This does not mean bending over for Donald Trump and so on, but let's not write everybody off, because those are the same people, when we are being lied about in Congress and elsewhere, are going to stand up for us and say, this is not true about South Africa. So that is why it is important that we keep the ties between the peoples. The governments can fight, but the people, if the reason for the fight is not that deep, must maintain their friendships. But there's something else that we need to do. And I think it is to make sure that our other relationships with all our trading partners, whether it is in Europe, whether it is in China, whether it is in Asia, it is in the global south, as it were, now is the time to work feverishly to deepen ties and develop markets and grow them and so on. So that if the Trump administration says, we don't want your agricultural products, we've got alternatives about where we can send those products. That's what the Chinese did after the first round of tariffs that Joe Biden kept in place and Trump has added on to it. They didn't sit and spend their time, swearing at the US on Twitter and so on. They got to work. They started immediately and started doubling down and in developing new markets into other countries. That means we cannot have a parochial foreign policy where we say we are fighting the West. The West is at war with itself. Donald Trump is threatening tariffs against Canada, against Mexico, which are Western countries, against the European Union and so on. And so we can't see friendships in parochial and rigid ways, because in any event, we have deep ties with the European Union. We've got car companies here. We've got Volkswagen, they manufacture cars here. We've got BMW, they manufacture cars here. We've got Mercedes-Benz, they manufacture cars here. We've got other industrial companies, technology companies, and so on. And so we can't have this approach that says, all of these people are bad guys, we don't want to do any business with them, we only want to do business with Russia and China. No. Even our BRICS partners don't do that. China does not do that. China makes friends with any country that is prepared to work with China on mutual interest. That is what we must do. We must be friends with the Germans, we must be friends with the Italians, we must be friends with the Brits, with the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Australians, and so on. We must deepen these relationships to give ourselves what I call strategic optionality. The last point I want to make in this video is that we must guard jealously our national unity. We must guard jealously our national unity, because these kind of things can cause South Africans to start fighting amongst themselves. We affect the stability of South Africa. And it all emanates from a racist from across the Atlantic who's lying for his domestic reasons, domestic political reasons, and causes instability here. So it is really important that we unite on the basis of values. And one of the things we can do in this instance, for instance, is to make sure that those who are hoping to divide this country and cause conflict so that the status quo of inequality remains, we disappoint them by accelerating rationally and in a thoughtful and inclusive way all efforts to make sure there is socio-economic inclusion, there is land justice, there is spatial justice, there is economic justice in general, there is social justice, and so on. If there is a way to give them a middle finger, it is to show them that we are undeterred. South Africans will work together. We're going to use our constitution to get these outcomes, but more importantly, we're going to use the commitment of the South African people to build in their own country, to unity, to make sure that we get a country that is just, that is fair, where everybody has a fair shake, and not the America that Donald Trump is building. I thank you.